Welcome to Every Friday with Dan and Olivia. I'm Olivia Darbo.
I'm Dan Miles.
Okay, my topic today is about grandparents and great-grandparents and how a child benefits in that relationship and a grandparent or great-grandparent benefits in that relationship, by skipping a generation. Because obviously when you're a child and you look at your parents at a small age, you think they're pretty cool. You start to put them on the pedestal, your mother, your father, and then boom, enter the grandparents. And you are suddenly introduced to another parent-like person in your life. However, because they're a generation removed from your own parents, it's a completely different experience altogether. In fact, for some people that I've run into, they actually feel like had they not had that relationship with the grandparent, that they may not have had some of the moralistic fundamental values that have sort of stuck with them, from their life from that point on. In my personal experience, my grandmother, whose name was Grandpom, her actual name was Primrose Darbo. She came from a Yorkshire background family, and she was just this amazing woman that subsequently, from a very young age, after meeting her, became my hero. And in retrospect now, at this point in my life, she's unfortunately passed away now, but I actually tend to find I'm much more like her than I am even my own mother in some regards. So I just think for me, it's a really interesting topic because, sometimes grandparents actually end up raising their grandchildren.
It's funny because as I was listening to you talk, look what I wrote. Some kids are raised by grandparents. And it's like the first thing that occurred to me, that was going to be my comment, and boom, you did. Oh, incidentally, before we get too deep into this, Happy New Year, everybody. Welcome to 2016.
That's right. I'm sorry I didn't acknowledge that it's actually January 2016.
It is, and we're talking grandparents. And let me just jump in really quickly and mention that my grandfather on my father's side passed away in 1968 when I was 5 years old from a heart attack. So I didn't know him very well, but his wife, my father's mother, she lived to be 90 years old.
Amazing.
So I knew plenty of her. And then my mother's parents, my grandfather died from cancer when I was about a junior in high school, maybe a sophomore, so I knew him pretty well. And then my grandmother on that side lived to be 89. She died about 2 weeks shy of her 90th birthday. So 3 of my 4 grandparents I knew pretty dang well.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I didn't know my mother's grandparents, my mother's parents. I met my grandfather once. I never got to meet my grandmother. So for me, it was really just my grandparents on my father's side. And I don't want to, not mention my grandfather, who was married to Grandpom, to Primrose, but my grandmother one of the reasons a couple of reasons why she was my hero is she played the church organ for about 40 years. So when we went to church, she was the woman behind that instrument.
My mother did that for 50 years.
I mean, amazing. And it influenced me in such an incredible way. She taught me over 40 British religious hymns, which I learned, I think, over the course of about 2 weeks. I had like a crash course. I was a little bit scared of her and totally in awe of her. And I think the reason that I was scared of her was because I was so in awe of her and she was such a hero to me at such a young age. It made me want to try harder. So when I said that I did a crash course of learning 40 hymns in 2 weeks, she was actually the woman who instilled in me how to memorize things. And I think subsequently from that point on, I developed this photographic memory. There's just so many reasons why, looking back in hindsight now, had she not been alive, I don't even know if I'd be the same kind of person that I am today.
She's a big influence on you.
Yeah, I mean, she also had this incredible and uncanny ability to transpose any song that you could just hear on the radio. She would take it, she would make it her own, reinvent the lyrics with the same exact phrasing and rhythmic consistency of the original song. For example, when my brother and I moved to Taos, New Mexico, when I was about 9, we came back when I was about 12. And the first thing that she did when we came back from the airport is she said,
I want to play you a song. I've done a version of Hello Dolly, and I've made it Hello Ollie. And for Ben, your brother, it's Stevie Wonder's rendition of For Once in My Life.
Wow.
And I'll give you an example, the Stevie Wonder song, she just played on the piano and she said, my brother's name was Ben. And she'd say, for once in my life I am truly excited. My eldest grandson is here. For once in my life I am truly delighted. Let's welcome Ben with a cheer. But all the inflections, so, in the back of my mind, I'd heard Stevie Wonder for once in my life, but then suddenly it was magically removed.
Nice.
Because she had sort of kind of made it her own. So, I bring up the topic because I think more and more so now as, life is evolving and time is progressing for children, I think grandparents, they hold on to lineage. It's really important to them. It's almost like before they die, it's kind of imperative, I think, that they feel like they've left their mark and their trail. And most significantly, I think, for their grandchildren, because that's the next generation that's coming up, and they want to make sure that they have something to, that they pass the torch.
We were talking last week about The Last Good Time. Maureen Stapleton just assumed that her neighbor had grandchildren. She found out he didn't. She was like horrified. She's like,
yeah.
What else is the point of being this age if you're not a grandparent? Was kind of her attitude, because she had grandkids and she was, that movie that no one will be able to see because it's so rare. But
well, we never say never.
No, but
you have a copy.
I do.
So you can get it around.
I do, for sale, $150.
Well, I'll buy it. I'll buy
it. But no, oh yes, and interesting thing is you have to realize, like, my grandfather was born in the 1800s, and when World War II broke out, he was too old to be in the army.
Right.
World War II.
Right.
And when I knew him, it was well past that. When he was a little boy, he knew Frank James from Jesse James, the James Gang, the Frank James. Frank James was an old man. My grandfather, Ray Cound, he was a little boy. Mm-hmm. They went hunting or something together once or twice. He just kind of rubbed elbows with the Old West. I'll tell you one thing that I find interesting. This is kind of a tangent, but kind of not. You think about the year you were born and the age you are, and then go back to your birth date, and instead of counting forward, count back in time. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Like, let's say go to 1950. Mm-hmm. Let's say you're 50 years old in the year 2000. Mm-hmm. So go back to 1950.
Still a Generation X, and this is a really interesting topic because, I want you to continue, but I want to bring something up after you.
All I mean is, like, you figure, like, I'm 52 right now. So if I go back to 1963 and go 52 years in the other direction, mm-hmm. Oh no, I didn't know there was going to be math. Let's see, 63, was that 1911 mm-hmm. or something? I hope I did that right. You know what I mean? And you imagine yourself being born then and being the age you are now in 1963, etc. I'd play that little game sometimes. What was your point?
Well, my point, I really, the thing that I wanted to mention, just that I think is interesting to kind of tie this whole theme in together is, generations, the baby boomers, you've got, the younger generation below us, which are the millenniums. And then before that, these varied different generations, there's significant reasons that separate each generation. And a lot of it has to do with war and, propaganda and, socially what was going on in music. And there's so many things that are impressionable to each generation that make their generation their own. But so for my grandmother and my grandfather's generation, they went through World War II. And I think the war significantly, she used to play war songs when she was waiting for my grandfather to come home, "Mean to Me," which is a standard torch war song, and she would literally. That's when Irving Berlin and those guys were kind of around. And if you just look at music and lyrics and the way that influenced people in that day and age, now I think millennials look at that, or even the younger generation, and that is cool to them now. Do you know what I'm saying? So if you actually look, if you have enough time that's gone past, and that enough generation gaps, it's cyclical and things start to come back. So it's another reason why, if you are fortunate enough to to have great grandparents that are still alive while you're a kid and get enough of an influence from them, it's so incredibly rich because you're getting the tail end of a whole different era.
You know, it's funny. I was on when I flew over to Los Angeles this morning. I was sitting next to two women. I don't know if it was a mother-daughter, but they obviously knew each other very well. She had kind of her voice would go in and out of an accent. She must have been in her 20s. They mentioned the word Australia several times, so I think she might have been from Australia, losing her accent or whatever. And so I would guess she was maybe 20, 25 tops, probably younger than that. And she had a book with her, and it was by Patti Smith. And I thought. But I'm thinking, I wouldn't have thought that this young person next to me would be interested in that, even know who she was.
Oh, yeah.
No, I didn't turn and go, hey, I host a music podcast, and I didn't do that bit, but I was just kind of surprised. It would have been like if there would have been like a 22-year-old guy reading Bobby Whitlock's book, about Derek and the Dominoes and stuff. They're interested in actually, not to go too much of a tangent, but when Steely Dan came back together and they made a little documentary about Two Against Nature, there were some young girls, we'll say 21 or something, and they had gone and checked out the Steely Dan concert without really knowing much about Steely Dan. There's something to do, I guess. And, obviously, once you dive in there, if it's your thing, it's really your thing. But they said what really impressed them, because obviously most of the people there were maybe much older, but there was one tune, it was probably Josie or something with the groove, where they just commented that, like, they looked and a whole row of people just going like,
yeah.
They're like making the same little motion, and they're so locked into that thing, and that impressed them. No band from their era did, had that reaction on people. And quickly, another guy mentioned he was just going through his parents' cassette tapes or seeing what was of interest. Found a cassette of Asia, and just became an immediate fan of Steely Dan. It's like, it's like finding a little treasure out there.
Yeah,
It's like,
yeah. Well, I mean, for me, lineage is so important, and I think that grandparents tend to find that more interesting than your parents. I mean, my father, I think, just benefited from a videotape that we just showed him when he was recently over, when both my brother and I had the opportunity, when my grandparents were still alive, to videotape them actually talking about the family. And he didn't even really have an interest about it when he was growing up. But for whatever reason, his kids did, and specifically me. I mean, I think that there's so much to gain. I almost have an archaeologist's approach to family lineage, because I think the more we learn about our family, and our bloodline, and it kind of gives us, it's the impetus to kind of keep us carrying on,
it's living history, really,
and stay committed to life, however, through the hardships, through the good times and the bad, because we know that our ancestors have done the same, and they've done things that are really cool that kind of prod us on.
When you're so genetically similar to someone, you got, like, I guess now people tell me, now that I'm older, I kind of look like my dad. When I was younger, I didn't. And then I think of him at my age, etc. But you kind of imagine, like, my grandfather sort of physiologically wasn't much different from me in a way. We're so closely related.
Right.
And it goes back and back that you would imagine when they're talking about, when my dad talks about when he's in Vietnam, or when my grandfather talks about when he was in Texas back in the day, it's not really like a Ken Burns documentary. It's like a person who was there. Maybe they weren't the focus of attention, but they were there. And they are the person who created your parent. So, yeah, it totally draws you in. I completely agree with that.
The thing that we're leaving out, or that I'd like to mention now, is the benefits for a grandparent or great grandparent having the opportunity to parent yet again. However, how that differentiates from when they actually had their own child. So I think it works both ways. I just think it's a really interesting topic in terms of just procreation in general, that, when you have offspring and then you have that second generation of offspring, and sometimes that can actually be an even more fulfilling, or, not even, sometimes it's more fulfilling in some people's cases, but just in general, I think it's ironic to me that the benefits that are so completely different. It's just such a different relationship.
Kind of like a do-over in a way.
Yeah, it's a do-over. I've heard a lot of grandparents say to me, it sure is a lot easier than, when I raised Marty and Dan, they can kind of take a back seat, but yet through that ability to be more relaxed, and they don't have that keen sense of responsibility, they can kind of have, like you're saying, another shot at it, a parenting, but it's more from a place of wisdom where, they just...
older and wiser.
Yeah, they're kind of on vacation, but they're still parenting.
Also, when you parent the first round, you're younger, you're more active in your career. A grandparent tends to be retired or have more free time on their hands.
Or if there's things that you didn't get to do or areas that you made mistakes in, let's say, because everybody does as a parent, and we all know, as do the kids of the parents, when they then become parents, that parents do the best that they can. And you're more forgiving as you become a parent than to your own parents. So it's kind of this really interesting cycle. But I think with the grandparents and the great-grandparents, they have the opportunity to, the mistakes that maybe they made with their own kids, they have the opportunity to have another shot at that and kind of close the circle, so that by the end of their existence, they kind of feel like, hey, I feel like I did a pretty good, well-rounded job.
The other thing, too, is even if it isn't your own grandparents, we all have friends, and they all have parents and grandparents. I mean, there are other people with friends in my family who are more interested, let's say, in my dad than I was in the sense of certain aspects. Like, for example, my dad was military. Somebody might be really interested in that. They might find my dad really fascinating in that regard, where his grandparents even more so. I mean, particularly if they've, like you say, maybe music skips a generation. Maybe somebody's interested in playing the trombone and their dad has no interest, but their granddad worked with Duke Ellington once.
Exactly.
Zoom over to granddad. Yeah.
Exactly. I just think, for example, like my grandmother, she was very into being fair, and I never got that from my parents. I got a lot of things from my parents, but it was like these things that I just never got from my parents because they were so different to who she was and to who my grandfather were, that I just picked up on. And for whatever reason, it just had more of a profound effect on my life. Like she said, Olivia, you have to learn how to be a good loser. When you have that Easter egg hunt with Ben, and you of course, we all know you're going to find all the eggs, but let's just say this time you don't find all the eggs. You let Ben find the eggs, and then you can practice losing and be a good loser, because in life everybody loses, and that's an indoctrination into life, you see. And I was like, I don't want to lose. I know where all the eggs are, Grandmummy, and I know where all the bunnies are too. And she said, I know, but that's not the point. Let him find the eggs.
I think we need to have an animated show based on that character, and you can do all the voices.
But I mean, so you could see why that endearing woman would have stuck with me. Do you know what I mean? And why ultimately?
I'm getting her.
I'm impersonating her.
I know.
Now.
I'm getting
She's
her
like
secondhand through you,
right,
and I feel like I kind of have met her. I kind of feel like, a little bit from now, we're going to be listening to your final song. I'm kind of feeling like after that, for a tag we should put on for once in your life, is to play everybody out.
I did it my way. We should do a Frank Sinatra episode, by the way, because it was just his birthday.
We certainly can.
The chairman of the board.
And now it is time for Tom at 20.
Tom at 20!
Tom, grandparents, Easter eggs.
Let's go, Tommy, baby. What you got?
I'm vaguely unsettled by the title of this bit. I just want you to know that. I didn't realize it was 20 minutes the first time you brought it up, and I thought, Tom at 20, like, no one wants to hang out with 20-year-old me. That's a bad scene. That's
there was a show called James at 15. Do you remember that with Lance Kerwin back in the 70s?
No.
And then it was called James at 16 when he got a year older. And so people used to tell me I looked like him. So look, James at 15. So Tom at 20 makes me think of James at 15.
Sure. James at 15, James at 16, James at 17. That's a branding nightmare is what that is.
Yeah.
Anyway.
It's hard to keep up with.
Grandparents. My grandfather just died, in fact. Last month.
Sorry.
He was a good guy. He fought in World War II. He was in the Navy, and he was a good guy. And he was always really good to me in that he was like this man's man. He was into carpentry and hunting, and he rode motorcycles and all
Nick
this.
Offerman type,
basically. And I was like so very much not. And yet he accepted me anyway, which was nice. That was an unusual thing. Growing
there
up.
you go.
Yeah.
He accepted you. Now, how do you think that something that seems slight, like, well, he just accepted me. How does that then expand into your adulthood and kind of grow like a sort of orchid in your soul?
An orchid in my soul.
It becomes bigger and bigger, right, as each decade goes on.
I agree with you, and I'm also writing that down for it. That's a song idea right there. I'm putting that.
So basically, it teaches you that like a macho man kind of guy, you could say, hey, I like sci-fi, and you go, oh, that's cool.
Yeah, yeah,
exactly. And so we can coexist.
And not
you
even
don't have to be like me,
right? Exactly. Not even so much. Hey, this thing that you're into is great, but like it's okay that you're not into the things I'm into. It wasn't like,
humility.
Hey, boy, do this thing. Like, it wasn't like that. But also the thing about trends and things skipping a generation, which is really interesting. I've always thought that's a really true facet of pop culture. Like all great pop culture goes through 4 cycles. Mm-hmm. It's popular. There's a backlash against it. Mm-hmm. It becomes kitsch.
Yes.
And then it comes around again and is just recognized as truly great.
Yeah.
See, for example, Barry Manilow.
Yes.
The Bee Gees, I was thinking of.
The Bee Gees, good example, yeah. Stuff like that.
Eartha Kitt.
Yeah.
And I definitely think that's something that you see sometimes in shorter cycles, sometimes in longer cycles. It's not always, it used to be like every 20 years they try to repeat like the fashion of the last 20 or something like that. But it's, kind of depends on the thing.
So Tom at 20 years. Okay, well, that was a good little dose of Tom. Olivia's closing song. Let's hear what that's going to be.
Well, I'm going to play a Stevie Wonder song.
Are you?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, let's spin it.
Looking back on when I was a little nappy-headed boy, and my only worry was for Christmas.
Well, you can never go wrong with Stevie Wonder. You know, I
Is the man.
remember very well when that album came out, and we're talking about, you know, going through your parents' record collection and discovering Asia. Imagine coming across Songs in the Key of Life. I mean, I recognize that as an instant masterpiece at the
A
time.
masterpiece.
You know, the song "As" was on FM radio, and they go, "This is a new Stevie Wonder album." You know, "As the Sun," you know the song.
Yeah.
And I thought, oh, that's pretty nice. And then I got the album. It's like one awesome tune after
mind-blowing.
another. I already knew who he was, and I mean, I remember when I lived in Germany, that You Haven't Done Nothing and Boogie on Reggae Woman and that kind of
Yeah.
stuff. I think the very first 45 single I bought was You're the Sunshine of My Life. I know the first vinyl album I got was Elton John, Goodbye Yellow Brick Road, a
Yeah.
double album. So yeah, Stevie, always a huge influence. And the thing about it, as Quincy Jones pointed out, who writes a rhythm like that? Like Superstition or I Wish? Who just whips that out and makes
Yeah.
a song on it?
Then it's incredibly busy, but the pocket is so deep that it doesn't matter. Everything has its place, and it's just gorgeous.
Mason's bass player.
Like my favorite Stevie Wonder thing, he was on Sesame Street doing Superstition, and they played it for like 7.5 minutes, and you watch the kids in the background, and they're just losing their minds. They're dancing they're so into the groove. It's just astounding.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a famous clip.
He's like a prime example, I think, of, you know, I think you could put him on the same in the same stratosphere as Mozart, sort of 100 years from now. When people first listen to Mozart, they said, okay, is he still going to be there 100 years from now? Are people still going to lose their minds? I mean, Stevie Wonder, he's just hit that.
If you think of the Beatles and then you think of the British Invasion of similar bands, when was there a similar Stevie Wonder? I mean, there's him.
An anomaly.
Well, maybe there's Ray Charles, both being blind, but I mean, there's nobody else. They're sort of Stevie-ish vocalists. I guess the melisma is kind of one of the things, the singing many notes. He kind of pioneered
But
that.
he's a one-man show. I mean, he's playing every instrument on the majority of his albums, and I
Yeah.
think that's who's finding those deep pockets. That's who's writing all the lyrics. It's all coming from one organism. You know what I mean?
What do you want to bet? He's a grandparent.
Yeah, exactly. It's just
Tying it all together.
That's
That's
what
what I do.
I was just going to tie it all together. Like, you know, if his grandchildren heard that album, you know, just look at what he's got to leave his offspring.
Oh, if he would have quit,
And the world
if he
at
would have
that.
quit 2 or 3 albums in,
Many
he would have made his
generations.
mark. But
Yeah.
the fact that he kept going, oh my goodness, yeah, very important influence on me, just in terms of sitting down and recreating his music on an instrument. So educational, so fun to do.
Also, just what a human being's capable of. You know, I mean, you know, and it's incredible. You know, though yes, he is blind, he's accomplished more than most people who have eyes in this world.
Fewer
so.
distractions. You know, for a period of time, he also lost his sense of smell. He was in an accident. So imagine if you can't see anything or smell anything, you're going to probably really focus on the music.
Yeah.
And what have you got left? Tactile. Okay, well, hey, great episode. Happy New Year, everyone. We're off and running.
A happy New Year to everybody, and let's make it a good one. Let's make it count like Stevie does.
That's right. 51 more episodes, and we'll be doing New Year's one again. So,
Yep.
see you next week.
See ya.
For once in my life, I have someone who needs me, someone I've needed so long. For once unafraid, I can go where life leads me. Somehow I know I'll be strong. For once I can touch what my heart used to dream of long before I knew. Oh, someone warm like you would make my dream come true. Yeah. For once in my life, I won't let sorrow hurt me, not like it's hurt me before. For once I have something I know won't desert me. I'm not alone anymore.